I hired a plumber to fix the pipes in my basement on a quiet Thursday morning. Less than an hour later, my phone rang and he whispered, "Ma'am, I don't want to scare you, but I think someone is living down here." My coffee mug slipped from my fingers and shattered on the kitchen floor. That was when I discovered that my own grandson had been hiding a secret in my house for 7 years, a secret that would destroy everything I thought I knew about my family. But before we get into the story, please support me by hitting that like button and subscribing right now. I also want to say hi. Leave your name, city, and the word present in the comments. I want to know where you're listening from, even in the most distant places. Thursday mornings were supposed to be peaceful. After 40 years of teaching elementary school in Portland, Oregon, I had learned to value moments of silence. The soft hum of the refrigerator, the birds chirping outside the kitchen window, the familiar creaking of my old Victorian home settling in for another day. I was at the sink, washing the breakfast dishes when the plumber's van pulled into my driveway. His name was Marcus Webb, a young man in his 30s with kind eyes and calloused hands. He had been recommended by my neighbor, and I needed someone to look at the basement pipes. They had been making strange noises for weeks, and at 69, I wasn't going to crawl down there myself. My name is Eleanor Mitchell, and I live alone now. My husband, Robert, passed away 12 years ago from a heart attack. Right in the middle of our anniversary dinner, one moment he was laughing at something I said, and the next, he was gone. The doctor said it was instant, that he didn't suffer. I suppose I was meant to comfort me. We had a daughter, Patricia, who died in a car accident 8 years ago. She was only 42. She left behind 2 children, my grandson Daniel, now 35, and my granddaughter Sophie, who would have been 27 this year. I say would have because Sophie disappeared 7 years ago, just 6 months after her mother's funeral. She was 20, a talented painter who had just been accepted into the San Francisco Art Institute. She had her mother's eyes and her grandmother's stubbornness. The night she vanished, she told me she was meeting a friend for coffee. She kissed my cheek, said "I love you, Grandma," and walked out the door. I never saw her again. The police searched for months. They found her car abandoned near the Columbia River Gorge, keys still in the ignition. They theorized that she had taken her own life, devastated by the grief of losing her mother. I refused to believe it. Sophie was sad, yes, but she was also strong. She had plans. She had dreams. But as months turned into years, even I began to accept the terrible possibility that my granddaughter was gone forever. Daniel moved into my house after Sophie's disappearance. He showed up at my door with a suitcase and eyes red from crying. He said he couldn't bear to see me alone in this huge house, wandering among nothing but memories. He converted the basement into a workshop for his woodworking business. He made furniture, beautiful pieces that he sold at craft fairs and online. He was talented, everyone said so. He took care of me. He cooked dinner almost every night, drove me to doctor's appointments, and made sure I took my medication. He was the perfect grandson, attentive and loving. I thank God every day for still having him. That Thursday morning, Marcus the plumber had been in the basement for about 40 minutes when my phone rang. I answered it, expecting him to tell me about corroded pipes or old fittings. Instead, his voice came through low and hesitant. "Mrs. Mitchell, I don't mean to alarm you, but there's something strange down here." I felt a chill run down my spine. Strange how? There's a wall here that doesn't look right, and I swear I heard someone coughing on the other side. My hand went cold around the phone. That's impossible. There's only my grandson's workshop down there. "Ma'am, I've been doing this job for 15 years. I know the sound of a person when I hear one. And this wall is too new for the rest of the basement." I hung up the phone and stood frozen in the middle of the kitchen, unable to move. Daniel had left early that morning for a delivery in Salem. He wouldn't be back before 5 in the afternoon. His workshop. I rarely went down there. The stairs were too steep for my arthritic knees, and Daniel always said the sawdust was bad for my lungs. He would come up to show me his finished pieces, proud as a child showing off a drawing. But now, standing there with the shards of my coffee mug at my feet, I realized I hadn't been down in that basement in over 5 years. 5 years? How could I have been so blind? I descended the stairs slowly, gripping the banister tightly. Each step creaked under my weight, sounds I hadn't heard in years. The air grew colder as I went down, thick with the smell of sawdust and something else, something stale and human that I couldn't quite identify. Marcus was waiting for me at the bottom, his face pale under the fluorescent light. He pointed to the back wall, where there used to be just bare concrete. Now there was drywall. New. Painted white. Completely out of place. The workshop looked normal at first glance. Workbenches lined with tools. Sawhorses holding unfinished projects. Wood shavings scattered across the concrete floor. But that wall didn't belong. I knocked here, Marcus said softly. "Listen." He gave 3 light taps on the wall. The sound came back hollow. And then, so faint I could have imagined it, I heard it, a breath. Rapid. Scared. Is someone in there? I called out, my voice trembling. Silence. Please, I tried again. My name is Eleanor. I live here. Are you okay? And then it came, a voice. Weak. Raspy. But unmistakable. Grandma. The world spun around me. My legs gave out, and Marcus caught me before I hit the floor. That voice. I knew that voice. I had spent 7 years dreaming of that voice, praying to hear it one more time. Sophie? I whispered. Sophie, is that you? A sob broke through the wall. Grandma, get me out of here. Please. He's going to come back. Daniel. My grandson. The boy I helped raise. The man who lived in my house, ate at my table, kissed my forehead every night before bed. Marcus was already on the phone with 911. I could barely breathe. My granddaughter, whom everyone thought was dead, was alive, trapped behind a wall in my own basement, for 7 years. And the person who kept her there was her own brother. Friends, every story I tell you is published every single day. But YouTube will only show them to you if you smash that red subscribe button. Please, do it right now while I'm speaking. Tap subscribe, turn on notifications, and you'll never miss a story. Did you do it? Thank you. The police arrived in 17 minutes. It felt like 17 hours. I sat on the basement stairs, unable to move away from that wall, talking to Sophie through it. My voice kept cracking and tears streamed down my face uncontrollably. Hang in there, sweetheart, I repeated. Help is coming. Grandma is here. I'm not going anywhere. On the other side, Sophie wept softly. She told me that Daniel checked the wall every night before bed, that he had a strict routine, that she learned to stay in absolute silence during the day because she never knew when someone might be in the house. How many times, she whispered, did I hear your voice upstairs, Grandma? Talking to him, laughing with him. And I wanted to scream, but I was so afraid. Every word was a knife to my heart. The officers filed down the stairs, faces serious and professional. A detective named Sarah Cooper took charge. She was a woman in her 40s, graying hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, eyes that looked like they had seen too much. Mrs. Mitchell, she said gently, I need you to go upstairs now. We're going to get her out, but I need you to give us room to work. I didn't want to go. Every fiber of my being wanted to stay right there, close to my granddaughter. But Marcus helped me up and I sat in the kitchen, shaking, listening to the sounds coming from the basement. Power tools. Orders being shouted. And then silence, followed by the most beautiful sound I've ever heard in my life. She's alive. We need paramedics down here. Now. I ran to the stairs, ignoring the pain in my knees, ignoring everything. An officer tried to stop me, but Detective Cooper waved him off. Let her through, she said. It's the grandmother. I took the steps two at a time, bracing myself against the walls. And there she was. Sophie. My Sophie. She was lying on a makeshift gurney, surrounded by paramedics. She was so thin she looked like a skeleton covered in skin. Her hair, which used to be shiny brown like her mother's, was dull and matted, falling down to her waist. Her cheeks were sunken, her eyes huge and terrified. But when she saw me, something shifted. Those eyes filled with tears and she reached her arms out toward me. Grandma. I fell to my knees beside the gurney and hugged her with all the care I could muster, afraid she might break in my arms. She smelled of mold and sweat, but underneath that, it was still her. My girl. I found you, I sobbed. I'm sorry it took so long. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. She squeezed my hand with surprising strength. You came. I knew you would come. The room where they found her was a nightmare made real. 10 feet by 10 feet of concrete in despair. The walls were gray, stained with moisture and mold. A thin mattress lay on the floor, its fabric worn through in places, revealing the foam beneath. A bucket sat in one corner of her bathroom for 7 years. A small sink with a slow drip provided her only water source. But what struck me most were the paintings. They covered every inch of available wall space. Hundreds of them layered on top of each other, taped and pinned in overlapping chaos. Landscapes she had never seen. Sunsets she could only imagine. Faces my face, painted over and over again from memory. And birds. So many birds, flying across painted skies, escaping through imaginary windows, soaring toward freedom she couldn't have. The paramedics needed to separate us to get her to the hospital. I wanted to go with her, but Detective Cooper asked me to stay. There were questions. Many questions. I sat in the living room of my own house, looking around as if it were the first time. The photos on the wall. Daniel smiling next to me last Christmas. Daniel hugging me on my birthday. Daniel. How did I not see it? Detective Cooper sat in the armchair across from me, a notepad in her hands. Mrs. Mitchell, I need you to tell me everything about your grandson. When he moved in here, What his routine was like, anything you remember. I took a deep breath and began to speak. Daniel moved into my house a week after Sophie's disappearance. He showed up at my door with a suitcase and eyes red from crying. "I can't be alone, Grandma," he said. "And I don't want you to be alone either. We're all that's left." I welcomed him with open arms. How could I not? He was my grandson. He had just lost his sister, 6 months after losing his mother. I thought we were leaning on each other through the grief. For the first few months, he barely left his room. He said he was depressed, that he couldn't work. I understood him. I was devastated too. But then, gradually, he began to improve. He said he wanted to start something new, something to occupy his mind. Woodworking. He had always been good with his hands, ever since he was a kid. He asked if he could use the basement as a workshop. "Of course, honey," I said. "Whatever you need." He spent weeks renovating down there. He claimed he needed soundproofing for the loud tools, thermal insulation to protect the wood, proper ventilation for the sawdust. I never questioned it. Why would I? He was my grandson. Detective Cooper wrote everything down, her face impassive. "Did you notice changes in his behavior over the years? Anything out of the ordinary?" I thought with all the strength I had. "He was protective," I said slowly. "He didn't like it when I had visitors without notice. He said he needed to keep the workshop clean and organized, that he didn't want anyone going down there." "And you never thought that was strange?" "I thought he was dedicated to his work." My voice cracked. "I thought he was taking care of me." The silence that followed was deafening. The hospital was 20 minutes from my house. Detective Cooper drove me personally after they confirmed that Daniel had been arrested on a highway near Salem. He didn't resist. According to the officers, he simply stopped the car, got out with his hands up and said, "I knew this would happen someday." No remorse. No excuses. Just cold resignation. I couldn't process it. The boy I taught to tie his shoes. The teenager who cried on my shoulder when his father left. The man who brought me tea when I had a cold. How could he be the same monster who kept his own sister in captivity? At the hospital, Sophie was in a private room in the ICU. The doctors explained the situation before letting me in. Severe malnutrition, vitamin D deficiency, muscle atrophy, dental problems, psychological damage that would take years to fully assess. 7 years in a 10 by 10 foot room. No sunlight, no fresh air, no human contact other than her jailer. The doctor said her bones had weakened from lack of vitamin D. Her muscles had atrophied from lack of movement. Her teeth were damaged from poor nutrition. Her skin was pale as paper, having not seen the sun in nearly a decade. "She is incredibly resilient," the doctor said, trying to comfort me. "The fact that she maintained her sanity is remarkable." I entered the room quietly. Sophie was awake, propped up on pillows with 4 tubes connected to her thin arms. When she saw me, she tried to smile. "Hi, Grandma." I pulled a chair to the bedside and held her hand. It was cold and bony, but it was my granddaughter's hand. "How are you feeling, my love?" "Weird," she admitted. "So much light. So much noise. I have forgotten how big the world was." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Do you want to tell me what happened? Or would you rather wait?" Sophie looked at the ceiling for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was distant, as if she were telling someone else's story. "It was the day I told him about San Francisco." I remembered that day. Sophie was so excited. The acceptance letter had arrived and she ran to show me, her eyes sparkling with happiness. "Daniel acted strange when I told him," Sophie continued. "I thought he was jealous. Or maybe sad because I was leaving. He said he wanted to take me to dinner to celebrate. Just the two of us." She paused, her eyes filling with tears. "He drove me out to the river gorge. Said he wanted to show me the sunset from a special spot. I trusted him, Grandma. He was my brother." "I know. Honey. I know." When we got there, he asked me to get out of the car to see the view. The sky was turning orange and pink, and I remember thinking how beautiful it was. And when I turned my back, her voice broke. He hit me on the head with something. When I woke up, I was in that room. Tears streamed down my face, but I didn't wipe them away. I needed to listen. I needed to know. For the first few days, I screamed until I lost my voice. I pounded on the walls until my hands bled. But no one heard me. The room was soundproof. I could hear muffled sounds from above footsteps, the TV. Your voice sometimes, but no matter how loud I screamed, nothing got through. "Why, Sophie? Why did he do this?" She laughed bitterly. A laugh without humor, just pain. "Because of Mom." I didn't understand. "Patricia, what does your mother have to do with this?" Sophie looked at me with eyes far too old for her young face. "Grandma, Mom left a will." "A will that no one knew existed?" "She had a secret life insurance policy. $500,000. My heart stopped. Patricia had never mentioned any life insurance to me. She left everything to me, Sophie continued. Every cent. Daniel got nothing. The lawyer contacted me a week before my disappearance. Daniel was with me when I took the call. The pieces began to click into place in my mind, forming a horrific picture. He thought if you disappeared, he would be next in line. And he was. Sophie squeezed my hand. He got access to the money 6 months after I was declared dead. He used part of it to do the renovations in the basement. The rest he invested. But why keep you alive? Why not just? I couldn't finish the sentence. Because he discovered I was worth more alive than dead, Sophie said. When I was a kid, I drew all the time. Do you remember? I remembered. Sophie always had talent. Patricia used to say her daughter was born with a paintbrush in her hand. Daniel gave me painting supplies in the second year. Said it was so I wouldn't go crazy. But when he saw what I produced, she shook her head. He started selling them. First one canvas, then 2. Then 10. 20. Hundreds. The furniture. It was just a front. The real money came from my paintings. He created a fake identity, a reclusive artist who never appeared in public. The work sold for thousands of dollars. I thought of all the times Daniel showed me his wood creations. The pride on his face. The fake modesty when I praised him. All eyes. Every smile, every hug, every I love you, Grandma. How much? I asked, my voice just a whisper. How much did he make? Sophie closed her eyes. Over the last 5 years? More than $2 million. The room spun around me. $2 million. My granddaughter had produced $2 million in art while trapped in a windowless room in my own house. And I knew nothing. If you want to know how the story ends and discover many others, hit that red subscribe button. It's free and helps me a lot. Sophie, I said, holding her face between my hands. Forgive me, please. Forgive me for not finding you sooner. She covered my hands with hers. Grandma, you didn't know. How could you know? I should have realized. I should have suspected. He lived in my house. And he was your grandson. You loved him. There is no shame in being deceived by someone you love. But there was. There was so much shame I could barely breathe. There's one more thing, Sophie said softly. Something I need to tell you. I looked at her, waiting. I wasn't alone down there. Sophie's words turned my blood to ice. What do you mean you weren't alone? Sophie took a deep breath, gathering strength to continue. In the 3rd year, Daniel brought someone else, a girl. Her name was Megan. I felt as if the floor had dropped out from under me. She was 19, Sophie continued, her voice trembling. Daniel met her online. Said she was an artist too. That he wanted to expand the business. My God. Megan stayed in the room next to mine for 2 years. We could communicate by tapping on the walls. We developed a code. 3 taps meant I'm okay. 2 quick taps meant he's coming. 1 long tap meant good night. Sophie closed her eyes and tears slid out silently. She became my only friend. My only connection to another human being besides him. We would tap for hours sometimes, telling each other stories through the wall. She told me about her family in Ohio, her little sister who was learning to play piano, her dog named Biscuit who slept at the foot of her bed every night. A woman on the jury began to cry silently. One day, the tapping stopped. I heard screaming first, terrible screaming that went on for what felt like hours. Then silence. Daniel told me she had tried to run away. That he had no choice. I covered my mouth with my hands, unable to process the horror. I never knew what actually happened to her. I just know I never heard her voice again. I tapped on the wall for weeks, hoping she would answer. She never did. Detective Cooper was at the door. I hadn't realized she had entered. Her face was grave. Mrs. Mitchell, Sophie. We found something on the property. We looked at her in silence. In the backyard garden, underneath the rose bed your grandson planted 3 years ago. She didn't need to finish. The roses. Daniel had planted those roses for me on Mother's Day. He had given me a card that said, "For the best grandma in the world. These flowers are eternal, like my love for you." I had watered that flower bed every week. I had pruned the branches, weeded the soil, admired the red blooms that sprouted every spring. I had sat beside them on summer evenings, drinking iced tea and watching the sunset, thinking about how thoughtful my grandson was. And all this time, there was a 19-year-old girl buried beneath them. I started to vomit. I couldn't make it to the bathroom in time. Detective Cooper held my hair while I emptied my stomach onto the hospital floor, sobbing between spasms. Megan, a girl I never knew. A girl who died on my property, buried in my garden, while I lived my normal life a few yards away. How many times had I sat in that garden to read? How many times had I drunk my afternoon tea admiring those damn roses? When I finally managed to compose myself, Detective Cooper helped me sit down. "We're going to need to close off the property as a crime scene," she said gently. "Do you have somewhere to stay?" I shook my head, unable to speak. "My neighbor," Sophie said from the bed, "Mrs. Patterson. She always liked Grandma." The detective nodded. "I'll arrange it." I stayed with Sophie until she fell asleep. The doctor said she needed rest, that her body was exhausted from 7 years of deprivation. But even in her sleep, she held my hand tightly as if afraid I might disappear. I wasn't going anywhere. Not this time. In the following weeks, the investigation revealed the full extent of Daniel's crimes. Patricia's life insurance, the $500,000, had been the trigger. Daniel was deep in gambling debt when he found out about the money. Debts to dangerous people. He needed a quick solution. First, he tried to convince Sophie to split the money with him. She refused. Said her mother had left clear instructions in the will. The money was to pay for art school and start her career. So Daniel hatched a plan. He would kidnap her, wait for her to be declared dead, receive the money as next of kin. Simple as that. But then he saw her paintings. The police found detailed records on Daniel's computer. Spreadsheets showing every sale. Every painting had a code. Every code corresponded to a date and a price. He had kept meticulous records, like a businessman tracking inventory. Sophie had produced 342 paintings in 7 years. Some sold for $500, others for $50,000. The most expensive one, a haunting landscape of a forest she had never seen, sold to a collector in New York for $75,000. Daniel had created a fictional persona, an artist named Alexander Gray, a recluse who suffered from severe agoraphobia and never appeared in public. Interviews were done via mail. Photos on the website showed a man from behind, looking at a canvas. Collectors from all over the country bought Alexander Gray's works. Art magazines wrote about his unique style. Critics debated the meaning of his somber compositions, praising the raw emotion and profound isolation that emanated from each piece. No one knew the true artist was a woman in her early 20s, trapped in a windowless basement, painting to survive. And Megan. Her full name was Megan Elizabeth Turner, 19 years old when she vanished from her hometown in Columbus, Ohio. Her family had received text messages from her for months after the disappearance, saying she was fine, that she had run away to start a new life. The messages were from Daniel. He used the same strategy, the same manipulation, the same calculated cruelty. He had met Megan in an online art forum. She was talented, eager, and alone. Her parents were going through a divorce, and she felt lost. Daniel offered her an opportunity. Come to Portland, work with a successful artist, build a career. She took a bus across the country to meet him. She never made it home. But Megan was different from Sophie. She was rebellious, resistant. She tried to escape 3 times. On the 3rd attempt, she made it to the stairs before Daniel caught her. No one knows exactly what happened. Daniel refused to talk about it. But investigators found traces of blood on the basement walls, hidden under layers of paint. They found defensive wounds described in the medical examiner's report. They found evidence of a struggle that ended in tragedy. Megan was 21 when she died, 2 years younger than Sophie is now. Her family came from Ohio to Portland. I met them at the precinct, where we went to give our statements. Megan's father was a large man with eyes red from weeping. Her mother couldn't stop shaking. I didn't know what to say to them. How do you apologize for something so unforgivable? But Megan's mother approached me. She took my hands in hers. "You didn't know," she said, her voice choked. "Don't blame yourself for what he did. She died in my house," I whispered. "In my garden. And my daughter would be proud to know that your granddaughter survived. That someone escaped." We hugged right there, to grandmothers united by the incomprehensible horror our grandchildren had caused and suffered. Daniel's trial took place 8 months after the arrests. Sophie and I attended every day. We sat in the front row behind the prosecution and watched as the truth was exposed for the world to see. Daniel was charged with first-degree kidnapping, false imprisonment, second-degree murder, fraud, identity theft, and a dozen other lesser charges. His lawyer tried to plead insanity, but the prosecution's psychiatrist tore that argument to shreds. Daniel knew exactly what he was doing. Every decision was calculated. Every lie was deliberate. He wasn't crazy. He was simply cruel. The hardest testimony was Sophie's. She took the stand wearing a simple blue dress, her hair in a ponytail. She was healthier now, with color in her cheeks and flesh on her bones, but her eyes still carried shadows. The prosecutor, a woman named Victoria Chen, conducted the questioning with firm gentleness. "Sophie, can you describe for the jury the conditions in which you lived for 7 years?" Sophie took a deep breath. The room was about 10 by 10 feet. There were no windows. The only light came from a bulb in the ceiling that Daniel controlled from the outside. Sometimes he left it on for days. Sometimes he turned it off for weeks. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. I had a mattress on the floor, a bucket for my knees, and a small sink. Food came twice a day, passed through a slot at the bottom of the door, usually cold sandwiches, sometimes soup. On good days, he would bring me fruit. On bad days, nothing at all. And the art supplies? They came in the second year. Daniel said if I painted, he would give me privileges. More food. Light for longer. Books to read. Sophie looked directly at her brother. He turned my art into a bargaining chip. Daniel didn't look away. His face remained impassive, as if he were listening to a boring lecture. And what about Megan Turner? Sophie closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, they were full of tears. Megan arrived in my third year there. I heard her crying at night. We tapped on the walls to communicate. She told me about her family, her dreams, her dog named Biscuit. A woman on the jury began to cry silently. One day, her screams woke the whole house. Then, silence. Daniel told me she had left, that he had set her free. Sophie shook her head. I knew it was a lie. But what could I do? The prosecutor let the silence hang for a few seconds before continuing. Sophie, your brother is sitting a few feet away from you. Is there anything you would like to say to him? The defense attorney objected, but the judge allowed it. Sophie turned to Daniel. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. Brother and sister. Captor and victim. Why? Sophie asked, her voice breaking. We were family. I loved you. How could you do this to me? Daniel finally showed some emotion. His lips curled into a small, cruel smile. Because I could. The courtroom erupted. People shouted. The judge banged his gavel calling for order. Bailiffs moved toward Daniel, who remained seated, perfectly calm, as if he had just commented on the weather. I held Sophie's hand as she stepped down from the stand. She was trembling from head to toe. It's over, I whispered. You are so brave. I am so proud of you. The trial lasted another 3 weeks. The defense tried everything, claims of a traumatic childhood, drug influence, personality disorder. Nothing worked. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. When the verdict was read, Daniel didn't react. He simply stared straight ahead, as if it didn't affect him in the slightest. But I knew him. I knew every expression on that face I had loved for 35 years. And behind the mask of indifference, I saw something, fear. For the first time in his life, Daniel Mitchell wasn't in control. The sentence came 2 weeks later. Life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The judge was clear, given the severity of the crimes, the defendant's lack of remorse, and the need to protect society, Daniel Mitchell would spend the rest of his days behind bars. As the guards led him out of the courtroom, Daniel finally looked at me. His grandmother, the woman who raised him, who loved him, who trusted him blindly. Grandma, he said. I'm sorry. I stood up, looked into the eyes of the monster I had helped create. No, I replied. You aren't. But one day you will be. I turned my back and walked out of the courtroom holding my granddaughter's hand. I didn't look back. The following months were a roller coaster of emotions. Sophie moved in with me into a new apartment, far from that cursed house on the hill. We sold the property to an investor who planned to demolish it. Neither of us could bear the thought of someone living there, walking the same halls where so much horror had happened. The money from the sale, along with the funds recovered from the illegal sales of Sophie's paintings, was put into a trust fund for her. It was over $2 million the price of her stolen freedom. I don't want this money, Sophie said when the lawyer explained the situation. It's tainted. Use it to do something good, I suggested. Turn this pain into purpose. And that's exactly what she did. Sophie created the Hidden Light Foundation, an organization dedicated to helping survivors of kidnapping and false imprisonment. The money funded recovery centers, free therapy, legal assistance, and reintegration programs. Within the first year, they had helped over 50 families. By the second year, that number had tripled. She also started painting again. But her works were different now. Instead of the somber landscapes Daniel forced her to produce, Sophie painted scenes of hope. Birds flying against golden skies. Flowers breaking through cracked concrete. Hands reaching out through prison bars toward the light. Her first exhibition happened a year after the rescue. The gallery was in downtown Portland, a modern space with white walls and high ceilings. More than 200 people attended. I was at the back of the room, watching my granddaughter speak to the crowd. She wore an emerald green dress, her loose hair falling over her shoulders. She looked beautiful, strong, alive. Every painting in this room represents a stage of my journey, Sophie explained, her voice clear and steady. From dark to light, from despair to hope, from victim to survivor. She paused, her eyes meeting mine across the crowd. And none of this would be possible without my grandmother, Eleanor Mitchell. The woman who never gave up loving me, even when she thought I was dead. The woman who found me when everyone else had given up. The crowd applauded. People wiped away tears. I stood motionless, unable to process the magnitude of the moment. My granddaughter was alive. She was healthy. She was turning her pain into art, her tragedy into purpose. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something like peace. But true peace took longer to arrive. I spent months in therapy, working through the guilt that consumed me. How could I not notice? How could I live under the same roof as a monster and suspect nothing? My therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Rebecca Walsh, helped me understand. Eleanor, predators like Daniel are masters of manipulation. They study their victims, learn their weak points, exploit their trust. But he was my grandson. I knew him since he was born. You knew the version of him that he wanted you to know. The mask he wore. Underneath it was a completely different person. It was hard to accept. Part of me still looked for explanations, reasons, justifications. Maybe something had happened in his childhood. Maybe I had failed as a grandmother somehow. But the truth was simpler and more terrible. Some people simply choose evil. Daniel had every opportunity in the world. A family who loved him. Education. Resources. Support. And yet, he chose to hurt the people closest to him. Not because he needed to. Not because he was forced. But because, as he said himself, he could. That was the hardest part to accept. There was no comforting explanation. No childhood trauma to blame. No mental illness to justify. There was just a person who decided his desires were more important than the life and freedom of others. And I had loved that person. I still loved him in a twisted and painful way that I hated feeling. He was my grandson. Nothing would change that. But he was also a kidnapper, a torturer, a murderer. Learning to hold those two truths at the same time was the hardest work of my life. 3 years after the rescue, I received a letter. The return address was the Oregon State Penitentiary, where Daniel was serving his sentence. The letter was in a plain white envelope, my name and address written in the familiar handwriting I had known since he was a child. Sophie was at work when the letter arrived. I sat in the kitchen of her apartment, holding the unopened envelope for almost an hour. Finally, with shaking hands, I tore open the paper. Dear Grandma, I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness or your attention. But I need to try to explain. What I did was unforgivable. I know that now. Prison has given me a lot of time to think, and for the first time in my life, I am being honest with myself. When Mom died, something inside me broke. I was already in troubled debts, bad decisions, dangerous people threatening me. And when I found out about the money she left for Sophie, only for Sophie, I felt like she was rejecting me from the grave. I was always second place to Mom. Sophie was the favorite, the talented one, the special one. And even in death, Mom made it clear who she really loved. I'm not saying this to justify. There is no justification. I'm just trying to explain the black hole that existed inside me. The envy, the anger, the feeling of never being enough. Sophie didn't deserve what I did. Megan didn't deserve it. You didn't deserve it. I spent every night remembering Megan's screams. Sophie's silence. Your smile when you thought I was a good grandson. I was a monster wearing a human mask. And now the mask has fallen. I don't expect your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I finally feel the weight of what I did. Your grandson, Daniel the First, read the letter 3 times. Then I folded it carefully and put it in a drawer. Sophie arrived from work a few hours later. She found me sitting in the dark in the living room, staring at nothing. Grandma, is everything okay? I hesitated. I didn't know if I should tell her about the letter, if it would hurt her or help her in some way. But Sophie and I had promised each other no secrets. Never again. I told her about the letter. Read her every word. When I finished, Sophie was silent for a long time. Then she held out her hand. Can I see it? I handed her the paper. She read slowly, eyes scanning every line. He's lying, she said finally. How do you know? Because I knew him for 20 years, Grandma. And then I spent 7 years being his prisoner. She handed back the letter. This is just more manipulation. He wants you to feel sorry for him. Wants you to think he's the victim. But what if he's being sincere? What if he really changed? Sophie looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. Even if he had changed, which I doubted, doesn't erase what he did. Megan is still dead. I still lost 7 years of my life. You still lived years believing I was dead. She held my hands. Grandma, you don't owe him anything. Not forgiveness, not pity, not a reply. He made his choices. Now he lives with the consequences. I looked at my granddaughter, this extraordinary woman who had survived the unimaginable and emerged stronger. Were you able to forgive him? I asked. Sophie thought for a moment, no. And I don't know if I ever will. But I learned that forgiveness isn't something you owe anyone. It's something you choose to offer if and when you're ready. She smiled softly. And I'm not ready. Maybe I never will be. And that's okay. That night, I wrote a reply to Daniel. It was short. Daniel, I received your letter. I read every word. I don't believe you truly changed. But even if you had, it changes nothing. You destroyed lives. Yours. Sophie single quotes s. Megan single quotes s. Mine. There aren't enough apologies in the world to fix that. This will be the only time I reply. Do not write to me again. Eleanor mailed the letter the next day. I never heard from Daniel again. Today, as I write these words, it has been 5 years since Marcus, the plumber, heard a cough behind a wall in my basement. Sophie is 32 now. She got married last year to a history professor named Thomas, a kind man with a contagious smile and infinite patience. They are expecting their first child, my first great-grandchild. The Hidden Light Foundation has helped over 500 families since it was created. Sophie travels the country giving talks, sharing her story, offering hope to people who think their lives are over. Darkness is not permanent, she always says. Light always finds a way. I am 74 years old now. My knees hurt more than they used to, and I need glasses to read. But every morning, I wake up with a purpose. Because I learned something in those terrible years. Something I want to share with you, who are listening to the story. Trust is a fragile thing. We give it to the people we love, hoping they treat it with care. And most of the time, they do. But sometimes, the people we love most are the ones who can hurt us the deepest. This doesn't mean we should stop loving. It doesn't mean we should stop trusting. It just means we must keep our eyes open. Ask questions when something seems wrong. Don't ignore the warning signs just because they come from someone you want to believe in. If I had gone down to that basement sooner, if I had questioned why Daniel was so protective of his workshop, if I had paid attention to the little details that didn't fit, maybe Sophie would have lost only months instead of years. Maybe Megan would still be alive. I carry that guilt with me every day. But I also carry gratitude. Gratitude that Sophie survived. Gratitude that Marcus was honest about what he heard. Gratitude for every day I have with my granddaughter. Daniel is in prison, where he will spend the rest of his life. Sometimes at night I think of him. The boy I rocked to sleep. The teenager who taught me how to use a computer. The man I thought I knew. I don't forgive him. Probably never will. But I learned to separate the love I feel for the boy he was from the justice the man he became deserves. It isn't easy. But life rarely is. To you listening, pay attention to the people around you. Not because everyone is a monster, most aren't. But because real monsters are masters of disguise. They wear faces of love, speak words of affection, live in our homes and eat at our tables. And sometimes, the only way to discover them is by asking the hard questions. Going down to the basement when something feels wrong. Trusting your instincts, even when they contradict everything you want to believe. I couldn't save Megan. I almost lost Sophie forever. But I can tell the story. I can warn other people. I can turn my pain into purpose, just like Sophie did. So, if there is anything in this story that touches you, please don't ignore the signs. Don't assume you know someone completely just because you love them. Don't let the comfort of denial blind you to the truth. Light always finds a way. But sometimes we need to be brave enough to turn it on. If you like the story, click subscribe and tell me in the comments which part shocked you the most. There's more tomorrow. See you there!